You know, you have heard the adage 1,000 times.
Right, everyone has.
Yeah, you've probably heard it from like financial advisors or lifestyle gurus or maybe that one friend who insists on splitting the dinner check down to the absolute penny.
Oh, yeah, we all have that friend.
We really do. And they always hit you with, money cannot buy happiness.
The classic line.
Exactly. It's one of those universal platitudes that we are just, expected to accept as a fundamental truth of human existence.
Yeah, you picture the miserable billionaire up in his penthouse and then the joyful minimalist.
Right.
Yeah.
And the cultural narrative just tells you that contentment is entirely internal. It's all in your head. But what if we actually put that to a rigorous empirical test?
Which is exactly what we're looking at today.
Yeah. The researchers at Purdue University did exactly that. They mapped the psychology of joy directly to hard currency, and they found that the age-old adage is, well, it's measurably false.
Completely false.
You can, in fact, purchase peace of mind. But there is a really fascinating psychological ceiling to this transaction.
Yeah, and the underlying methodology of that Purdue study is where we really have to start. Just understand the mechanics here.
Right.
Because they utilize data from the Gallup World Poll, which is just this massive undertaking. We're talking about over 1.7 million individuals across more than 160 countries.
That is a huge sample size.
It's massive. And they were looking at two distinct metrics. First, emotional well-being.
Which is like your day-to-day mood, right?
Exactly. How often you laugh, your baseline stress levels, things like that. And second, they looked at life evaluation.
Okay, so more of a big picture thing.
Yeah, it's how you view your life overall when you take a step back and just, assess things. And what they discovered is a hard statistical threshold that they termed income satiation.
Income satiation. I like that phrase.
A great term. Basically, up to a very specific dollar amount, every extra bit of income actively reduces your daily stress. It improves your measurable mood.
So you are essentially buying your way out of anxiety.
Pretty much. But the moment you cross that specific threshold, the psychological return on investment just abruptly stops.
It just flatlines.
It flatlines.
Yeah.
Earning more money past that cutoff does virtually nothing for your day-to-day emotional well-being.
Think of it kind of like the diminishing returns of upgrading a smartphone.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Like if you were using a phone from 10 years ago.
Right.
And it has a shattered screen, the battery dies in an hour.
It's just a nightmare to use.
Exactly. Upgrading to a modern device is literally life-changing. It fundamentally improves your day. You are no longer stressed about finding a charger. Your app's actually open.
You could actually check your email.
Right. And that is the feeling of moving from financial insecurity to financial stability. But once you have that functioning modern phone, upgrading to next year's model,
The one with a slightly faster chip.
yeah, or a marginally better camera, it barely changes your daily experience. You have hit satiation. And here is the critical flaw in treating that Purdue study as like a static rule book.
Right.
The cost of that functioning smartphone completely changes depending on your zip code.
Because purchasing power parity is the invisible hand guiding this entire concept.
Yes.
A dollar is not a universal unit of security. The raw data from Purdue gave us a global average for the satiation point, but, an average is functionally useless if we're trying to apply it to a specific listener's life.
It doesn't help you if you live in, say, New York versus rural Ohio.
Exactly. The cost of living, local inflation rates, the baseline cost of just maintaining stability, they vary drastically. Your subjective life satisfaction relies on an economic foundation.
Right.
And the cost of pouring that foundation is dictated entirely by your geography.
Which brings us to the primary source driving our deep dive today. Ramirli took the Purdue University framework and applied a massive geographical correction to it.
A much-needed correction.
Definitely. They adjusted the satiation numbers for local purchasing power and inflation across 123 different countries.
They essentially calculated the localized cost of happiness.
Exactly. So for you listening right now, we are going to figure out exactly how much your current geography is charging you for peace of mind.
Because it might be a lot more than you think.
Oh, absolutely. Because if you feel like you are optimizing your career, you're increasing your income, but your baseline anxiety just isn't dropping, the data suggests your strategy isn't flawed.
No, you are simply operating in an incredibly expensive psychological market.
Right. So to understand the global baseline, we first have to look at the extremes.
We need to see where hitting that satiation point requires the highest absolute capital.
And the data paints an exceptionally steep curve for specific places. Leading the pack, the most expensive place on Earth to satisfy your soul is Iceland.
Yeah, the numbers for Iceland are wild.
They really are. To hit the satiation point there, you need to earn $163,579 per year. Yeah. And Australia falls right behind at 161,000. Switzerland sits around 154,000. And New Zealand demands just over 137,000.
What's fascinating here is that the economic mechanics driving these specific figures are rooted heavily in supply chain inelasticity and infrastructure costs.
Okay, what do you mean by inelasticity there?
We'll look at Iceland, Australia, and New Zealand. You are dealing with isolated geographies operating under what's called the island tax.
The island tax, so literally just the cost of getting things to an island.
Exactly. These nations rely heavily on unavoidable imports for baseline standard of living goods. And we aren't just talking about luxury items here.
Right, it's everyday stuff.
Yeah, we are talking about fresh fruit, agricultural imports, construction materials, technology like computers. The logistical premium of moving physical goods across oceans permanently inflates the floor of the local economy.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does. And then you compound that geographic reality with the policy choices we see in a place like Switzerland.
Now, Switzerland isn't an island.
No, it's landlocked. But it shares remarkably high mandatory infrastructure costs, including mandatory private health insurance and heavily funded public services. So the baseline cost of existing in these societies just requires a massive influx of capital.
Okay, let's unpack this because I have a major methodological question about this data.
Sure. What is it?
If we are looking at a $163,000 satiation point in Iceland, does this data set account for gross versus net income?
That is the big question.
Because Iceland operates with incredibly high income tax rates to fund all those public services. If the Purdue satiation point is based on gross income, but the government is taking like 40 or 50% of it before it even hits a citizen's bank account, aren't we just looking at a skewed metric?
I see where you're going with this.
Like, are Icelanders really paying more for happiness, or are they just paying for it on the public ledger instead of the private one? Because it feels like an inherent contradiction. I mean, Iceland consistently ranks near the very top of the World Happiness Report.
Yeah, usually right behind Finland.
Right. It's like buying an outrageously expensive concert ticket. Is the experience actually worth the sticker shock? If Iceland requires a massive six-figure salary just to feel secure, why is everyone there so happy?
And that is the exact tension the data reveals. The satiation figure reflects the gross income required to feel secure in that specific economic environment.
Okay.
But your point about the public ledger is the key to unlocking why they still rank so high in overall happiness despite the astronomical barrier to entry.
Because they get a lot back for those taxes.
Exactly. The data isn't contradictory. It's measuring two different phases of the social contract. The high income required isn't just buying, consumer goods or fancy cars. It is buying into a system that fundamentally removes existential anxiety.
So the high cost of living is essentially an insurance premium against catastrophe.
In a macroeconomic sense, yes, absolutely. When a society structurally guarantees extensive parental leave, world-leading gender equality, and a safety net that prevents medical bankruptcy.
Which is huge.
It's massive.
Right.
When you have that, the psychological burden of survival is just lifted. The financial threshold to reach the absolute peak of the income satiation curve is incredibly high due to taxes and import costs, but the societal return on investment is immediate.
That really changes how you look at it.
Yeah, citizens are insulated from the specific types of financial ruin that cause deep, chronic psychological distress in other developed nations.
That completely reframes the concept of expensive geography. Like, the stress isn't eliminated entirely, but it is a highly predictable, manageable flavor of stress compared to, the fear of a sudden medical bill wiping out your life savings.
Exactly. It's the difference between everyday stress and existential dread.
Right. But establishing the sheer price tag of happiness in these nations, it forces us to look at the other side of the ledger. Knowing that satiation costs over 160 grand in Iceland is only useful if we know how realistic it is for an average citizen to actually earn that much money there.
This is the pivot from absolute cost to realistic affordability. It forces us to ask whether the local economy is actually structurally designed to pay people enough to achieve the well-being it promises.
And Remetli mapped this out right. They mapped local average salaries against these calculated happiness costs.
Yes, they wanted to measure the global affordability gap.
And the results are incredibly stark. Out of all the countries analyzed, there is a severe deficit almost everywhere, except for a few notable exceptions.
Yeah, the gaps are pretty brutal in some places.
But there is one country where the affordability ratio completely breaks the mold. The Slovenian unicorn, as we could call it.
Slovenia is fascinating in this data set.
It really is. In Slovenia, the average salary doesn't just meet the local cost of happiness, it exceeds it. The average salary is roughly $42,700.
Which doesn't sound like a lot globally.
Right, but the local satiation threshold, just under $36,800. Yeah, so the average worker is earning 116.3% of the capital required to hit maximum emotional return on their income.
They're literally clearing the psychological hurdle with discretionary income to spare.
Contrast that with the structural realities in the United States, where the average salary only covers roughly 55.8% of the local happiness threshold.
Just over half. That's bleak.
It is. Or the United Kingdom and Australia, where average wages only bridge about 36% of the gap.
36%.
You have massive populations operating in the system where the average worker is structurally priced out of the contentment ceiling. They are just grasping at serotonin.
That's a great way to put it.
So is Slovenia just lucky with its math, or is there a secret recipe here? What is the mechanism that aligns wages and well-being so efficiently while major economic powerhouses are leaving their citizens so far behind?
Well, it comes down to fundamentally different philosophies on macroeconomic governance and really how a state measures success. Health is wealth here.
What do you mean by that?
In the US and the UK, the dominant metric of national health is gross domestic product, GDP. Policies optimized for growth, corporate output, market expansion.
Right. It's all about the economy growing.
But in Slovenia and several of its Eastern European neighbors, actually, local policies explicitly integrate well-being benchmarks.
So they measure happiness instead of just money.
They do both. They don't just rely on GDP. They actively track the social and emotional health of their citizens. They utilize metrics very similar to the Gallup data we discussed, and they use that data to shape urban planning, labor laws, and social infrastructure.
Wow, so they're essentially engineering their economy backward from the desired psychological outcome of the citizen, rather than just hoping the wealth from GDP growth eventually trickles down to improve daily life.
Precisely. And this isn't just an anomaly. Other Eastern European neighbors like Latvia, which covers about 84.7% of the threshold, and Poland at 74.5%, they also factor happiness into their policies.
That is incredible.
Yeah, by designing interventions that keep baseline living costs low, like affordable housing, accessible transit, subsidized public spaces, the income required to reach satiation plummets.
And when you lower that denominator, the average wage suddenly has immense emotional purchasing power.
Exactly. And we see similar mechanisms in a place like Singapore, which actually approaches this from the opposite direction.
Wait, Singapore is notoriously expensive.
It is. Yet they cover roughly 90% of their happiness threshold.
That seems impossible if they don't have the low baseline costs of Eastern Europe.
Right. But Singapore manages it through high localized wages and massive structural interventions. Specifically, their Housing and Development Board, which provides highly subsidized public housing to the vast majority of citizens.
Oh, I've heard of that, the HDB flats.
Yes. Even in a hyper-expensive market, if the government controls the largest lever of existential stress, which is housing costs, the gap between the average wage and the satiation point shrinks dramatically.
Oh, housing. Which brings us right back to the crisis of the American affordability gap.
Yeah, the housing market here is a major stressor.
Because if the U.S. is only covering roughly 55% of the satiation threshold on average, we really have to examine the absolute cost. The U.S. ranks as the 5th highest price of happiness in the world overall, sitting at a national average of $134,800.
But treating the U.S. economy as a monolith is a severe analytical error.
Yeah, the country is just too geographically diverse to treat as a single data point.
The variance within the United States is far too extreme to rely on a macro average. The cost of maintaining stability in a Midwestern town operates on an entirely different economic plane than doing so in a coastal metropolis.
So acquiring a baseline of joy in America requires intense geographical strategy.
It really does. You have to pick your zip code very carefully.
Let's dissect the extremes of that internal market, because the Empire State demands the highest premium.
New York.
New York. To hit income satiation in New York, a resident needs to earn $195,900 a year.
Almost 200 grand.
That is $65,000 over the national satiation average.
It's staggering.
Honolulu demands over $192,000. San Francisco requires $191,000.
And the drivers here are heavily documented, but they are deeply impactful on a psychological level. We are looking at a fiercely competitive housing market, strict zoning restrictions that limit new construction, and just the localized inflation of everyday services.
The price of a cup of coffee.
Exactly. When 50 or 60% of your take-home pay is allocated strictly to maintaining a roof over your head, you aren't buying security, you are buying survival.
Right.
The discretionary funds that usually fuel the upper ends of that satiation curve, the money for hobbies, travel, emergency savings, the things that actually buy peace of mind, they are completely devoured by baseline existence.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It essentially creates a coastal tax on sanity.
I love that phrase.
Because for decades, the dominant cultural narrative has been that upward mobility and the American dream require migrating to these big coastal hubs.
Yeah. Right, you go to New York to conquer finance or media.
Yeah, or you move to San Francisco for the tech boom. The assumption is always that proximity to these massive economic engines guarantees a higher quality of life because, well, the gross income potential is higher.
You can make a higher salary.
But the satiation data suggests this is a trap. If your ultimate goal is to reach that psychological flatline where financial anxiety actually disappears, moving to these cities might be the most inefficient strategy possible.
You are stepping onto a treadmill that accelerates faster than your earning potential.
Exactly. To actually cross the threshold, the data suggests looking at the Midwest or Texas.
Yeah, the regional data provides a really clear roadmap for this strategy. If we look at Cincinnati, Ohio, we see the lowest happiness cutoff among the major U.S. cities analyzed.
What's the number there?
The satiation point there is roughly $122,480.
Wow, that is a delta of over $73,000 compared to New York City.
It is a massive difference, and we see similar efficiencies in Texas. San Antonio has a threshold of about $123,600. Houston sits at $125,200.
So you do not need a Wall Street salary to secure your mental health if your housing costs don't require one.
Exactly.
You are trading proximity to prestige or, proximity to the ocean for absolute financial breathing room.
You are engaging in geographical arbitrage with your own psychology.
Geographical arbitrage.
Yeah, it is a strategic allocation of your career capital. Earning $100,000 in San Francisco leaves you deeply anxious and statistically far below the satiation point.
Because all your money goes to rent.
Right. But earning that exact same salary in Cincinnati puts you well within striking distance of maximum psychological return.
So what does this all mean? This completely unravels our opening platitude. The data from Purdue and the global adjustments from Remitly prove that the money-happiness connection is profoundly real.
It is undeniable at this point.
But it is not a linear equation where a larger bank account universally equals fewer problems. It is deeply tethered to the economic ecosystem you choose to inhabit.
It acts as a multiplier or a divider on the emotional weight of every single dollar you earn.
Right.
Whether you are navigating the supply chain premiums of Iceland while benefiting from their robust social safety net,
or utilizing the policy-driven affordability of Slovenia,
or strategically dodging the extreme rent traps of coastal American cities.
Geography dictates the rules of your emotional budget. And that leaves us with a fascinating, somewhat disruptive question for you to explore long after this deep dive ends.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Because the economic rules we just discussed were built in a world where your physical location was tethered to your employer. You had to live where the office was.
Right.
But we are rapidly shifting into a remote work-driven economy. What happens to this global happiness map when you sever the tie between where you earn and where you spend?
It introduces the ultimate variable.
It really does. What happens when you can earn a San Francisco-level tech salary, but you choose to deploy it in a Cincinnati market? Or, taking it to the global extreme, what if you pull a U.S. salary but establish your life in a highly optimized society like Slovenia?
Oh, wow.
Right. Does this new era of remote geographical arbitrage completely break the happiness cap? If you can decouple high earning potential from high cost geography, are you essentially hacking the formula for joy?
Or will a mass influx of highly paid remote workers simply gentrify the satiation point of these affordable cities, driving the cost of happiness up for the locals?
That is the dark side of the equation.
It really is.
It is the next massive economic shift, and it is something to seriously evaluate the next time you consider where to sign a lease. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the data sets behind the platitudes, and we will catch you next time.